Hey everyone, this is Moonflower Moments. Welcome back to my channel. So I am joining y'all today with a video response to Tarot Magpie, and this would be their 12 houses, 12 decks video. So with that being said, this is the basic premise is that you pick a deck for each house system of astrology. So if you're interested in this kind of subject or content, I really do want to recommend this book to you. I think it is excellent that Tarot Magpie picked this topic at the time that they did, because I have been really leaning into studying the house systems, and I've been using it through this book. So it is available on Spotify Premium for you to listen to. That's pretty much how I've been getting this kind of content. And then doing a little bit of reading on my Kindle too. But I personally have been studying my birth charts like mad. I've been studying the birth charts of those around me. I have a lot of shifting things. I just entered into my first Saturn return. And so I think that I'm very much enjoying another tool such as the house system to help me understand the ways of things around me. So with that being said, I will go ahead and jump in and get started. So Sylvie's first prompt is self-identity and first impressions, a deck you use for readings about your self-identity or you feel like represents you. So I'm going to go ahead and start off the bat with this one, which is a heavy hitter, y'all, heavy hitter. But like I said, hello Saturn return. I am in it. Just came into it a couple weeks ago. And the deck that I think best fits this for me is my Into the Lonely Woods Oracle. So with that being said, we're going to get personal real fast. You know what we do on my channel. I really feel like I'm coming into a place to where I no longer associate with the name Katie. So Katie is the name that I decided for myself to take on when I was 14 years old. And it is an abbreviation of my full name, which I really don't think fits me at all. But I think that I'm entering in the time in which I would like to be called Kate. Katie was the person who was warm and bubbly and very outgoing, and it was the persona that I needed to take on at the time in my life. And I feel like as I get older and I mature, I want to have a little bit of a harder edge. I want to be a little bit more solid, and so I think that I want to go by Kate. So this is my reintroduction to YouTube. It's going to take me a while. I probably will still call myself Katie every once in a while, but I think that this deck has really been helping me through this process and discovering my self-identity. So this has been the one that has helped me work through those first house issues, because as I've been on my path to say, okay, who is Kate? Who was Katie? How can I carry on some of those elements of Katie to Kate? You know, what can each of these personas learn from each other? This has been the deck that has been holding my hand through that grieving process. I think as we make room for ourselves to self-evolve, we need to have decks that support us and remind us that we are sometimes between two worlds. And so I originally thought that I was going to use this deck for grief work and therapy, and I guess I am. I'm using it in grief work in a different capacity. I'm encouraging myself to see the ebbs and the flows of myself and recognize that identity is ever shifting and ever changing, and we need to have moments and to journal and meditate and consider, and even decks to use that help meet us in the messiness of that self-identity. So this is the deck that I think represents the first house best for me right now. Now, typically I would probably say something along the lines of like Terra Botanical, which is like, you know, this deck. I actually had it out on my desk to show you a few cards if you wanted. But this one gets so much airtime on my channel. It's like, yeah, this is the deck that best describes me. But in terms of what I use to help me figure out my self-identity, right now it's this one. All right, so that was Into the Lonely Woods Oracle and Terra Botanical. So the house number 2 is personal resources, and Tarot Magpie selected for this prompt, reflect on money matters, abundance. It could also be a deck that feels like an investment. So I'm going to go ahead and pull for the money matters, a deck I use to work with money, a new deck in my collection. So I'll hold this one. This is Out of Hand Tarot. I feel like this is the perfect deck when it comes to managing money, because so my second house is ruled by Libra, and so I do rely often on, I'm definitely not like a sponge or a scrounger or whatever, but I definitely am very thankful to be married to someone who is better at managing money than I am. And so I think sometimes I make excuses for myself, like, oh, I don't have to figure out how to work taxes or how much money to save because I married a money man. And so I think when it comes down to it, this deck really helps me embrace the second house energy, because it's literally hands, right? And so I can imagine my own hands in the pot of the money that I am managing. And that has been useful for me. So I did do a reading about money a few weeks ago with this deck when I first got it in. And it was nice to see some active involvement. I think at this time of the year and in this time in my life, I really do want to start taking more personal accountability. And what better opportunity to take personal accountability with money than to have a deck that features hands, that features people actually going out and manipulating this resource. And being that the second house, it's normal, or rather the sign that it's associated with is Taurus. I like the fact that this deck is very like down to earth as well. You know, we're sticking our hands in that money. We are making money moves. We are playing in the abundance that we have. And there is a lot of abundance to be shown here. The Chariot, us going on this trip. Seven of Cups, all the different cups to choose from. And it's just a very beautiful deck too in terms of like its quality, which I think is a very, very Taurus trait to have. So the next one would be Community and Learning. And this is a deck that is conversational and easy to read. I knew what deck I was going to pick for this every time. I always know. My easy to read and conversational deck is going to be my Crow Tarot. Oh, I like the crows so much. I think y'all know that. This deck and I, if you look back at my videos from about a year ago, this deck and I were on fighting terms. I wanted to get rid of it. I was tired of it. It was squawking at me, but I couldn't figure out what it needed to say. And then it was one that I sat down and I was like, you know what? Let me take the time to actually get to know you. And when I did, I found that all of these different flowers speak so brilliantly to the meaning of the card. And I started to read them in a very metaphoric sense. So for example, these red flowers here definitely show the urgency of the Eight of Wands, but then we have the sunflowers here standing tall to meet that sunlight, to meet that challenge. So even though we're moving through things quickly, we're still standing tall and upright as things are changing around us. And once I started looking into the flower symbolism, because there are flowers in almost every single card, that's when I realized, hey, hold up. This deck works for me. So we have here, it looks like it's some like maybe some cherry blossoms, and there's also some snow perhaps with the white. So with the Six of Swords, we are moving away from the snow. We're moving away from that winter and into the cherry blossoms of spring. And like I said, like, I don't know, I feel like I read this deck very well. It is very conversational to me. I definitely represents like communication and learning to me, because if you think, of course, of crows, they are always so loud. They always want to squawk at you. But this deck also represents learning to me too, because it's the deck that I first learned. I first used when working with the loblolly pine, which is one of my spiritual allies. And so I used this deck to try to see the loblolly pine not as like a trash tree that like everyone has in their backyard and like there's so many of them and they're terrible around hurricane seasons, but like what can that tree actually teach me? And so this is a deck that I use for exploration of new ideas, which is just such the perfect balance for like house number 3. So this is my sweet, sweet, sweet Crow Tarot. All right, so the next one is Home and Roots. So this is house 4, which is the house of Cancer. I'm a Cancer sun, so I always love house 4. This is one of my favorite houses to think, to exist in, to just contemplate the ideas of. So according to Sylvie, this is a deck that gives you safety, security, nostalgia, or a deck you use for readings about your home. So I was really thinking about like home and roots when I picked this deck. And so I picked the Louisiana Cajun Creole Tarot by my friend, Cajun Conjurer. So it comes like in this nice like wooden box. He actually did the design work for the boxes. Like he bought the boxes and then he laser printed them. I think that's the correct name for this. It has like this nice little hatch. And of course this deck reminds me of Home and Roots. So he gives you like a small guidebook, but I have a larger guidebook as well, which explains all of the cards. So this deck is my home, and it follows the lineage of both the Cajun and then also the Creole individuals that live in my state, and the history of Louisiana's cultural traditions. So we have like, he has renamed a lot of stuff. The washboards are the pentacles. Here's La Lune, which is the moon. Of course, this reminds me of roots. My husband and I absolutely love herons, and so I'm very used to swampy scenes like this. We have resilience. Four of triangles. This would actually be Four of Swords, and this is actually a civil rights leader who is urging people to take a moment to rest, to come back to themselves so that they can recharge in the morning and get back to work. Fiddles would be wands. The triangles features the civil rights movement in Louisiana. Beau Soleil, which means sun. The back door, this is actually off of a song that essentially the guy was like going out all night partying. He was like sneaking through the back door, and so his parents were like asking him to take accountability for his choices. So it's cool. It also has like Louisiana music as well. The accordions are the cups. And I just find this deck to be a soft reminder of that home for me. Not only does it pull on the nostalgia of everything I have experienced in my years of living in Louisiana and living in Acadiana, but it's also pulling on a collective nostalgia. So some of these, like this is an oil rig. I mean, there are plenty of oil rigs nowadays. But you know, we're pulling on like here's Edwin Edwards. He was one of the crookedest governors in Louisiana history, and he existed. I don't know if he's still alive. If he is, he's very old. He's like in his 90s. But like I said before, it's pulling on some of those cultural roots from before. We have here the story of the Acadians who first left Canada to escape to Louisiana. They were actually forcibly evicted. They were exiled. And so I like the mixture of the more modern tones as well, along with some of these older storylines that flow through. But this deck looks like home to me, and this deck has images that feel like home to me. It wouldn't be unusual for me to go, you know, down the street. Actually, there is not even down the street. I can walk like probably 4 minutes, and there's a cemetery that has these above ground mausoleums. This is the most Cancer deck that I own because it is one that is deeply rich with layers, one that I really have to sit back and not only let what I know about this culture and what Jared conveys in his book about the culture, but also feel the intuitive layers come through. And it's a magical process for me to pull from this deck and feel the energy of my home within that reading. So yeah, this would be my deck to represent House 4. Jared is currently pre-ordering for this, so I'll leave a link in the description box below. Like I said, I'm not affiliated with Cajun Conjurer like officially, like I don't get paid for promotion or anything like that, but he's a wonderfully dear friend of mine, so I just want to promote his work. So you will be seeing more of that deck, I'm sure, in the weeks to come. Let me know if y'all want to walk through. So with that being said, House 5 is going to be for creativity and play, and it is a deck that perfectly expresses how you feel creatively or one that is fun to play with. I went with the one that is fun to play with for this one. And even though I picked 2 decks, I hope y'all can forgive me because the decks I picked are by the same creator. So does that count as one deck? So for my 5th house, my play, I wanted to pick Medieval Oracle of the Beast as well as Serpent and Peacock. This is the 1st edition. All right. So I had to pick these decks because these are the decks that make me laugh the most. My 5th house is in Capricorn. So you can imagine that I take a very serious approach to play. And so for me, it's important to have decks that make me laugh the way that Serpent and Peacock and Medieval Oracle of the Beast do. Because I do tend to take myself way too seriously. I tend to take my hobbies, my play, everything like that way too seriously. And so I love like this concept of this magician, like, oh, you're a little silly goose. Like you can do it all, but you're a little silly goose. So to me, this is what feels like play. I have a lot of Gemini in my chart, and I do consider my Serpent and Peacock to be like my ultimate Gemini deck. And so I think that that's important because even though Gemini doesn't have anything to do with like the fifth house and like I said before, mine's in Capricorn, like why am I bringing up Gemini? Like I like to play with ideas. I really very much enjoy the concept of looking at cards that are just a little bit strange and a little bit abnormal and saying, what the hell is going on with that guy's face? Like, why does it look like that? And then with Medieval Oracle of the Beast, it just takes it one step further because these creatures are absolutely, totally outrageous. You know, like, how is that a leopard? I guess it's a leopard, but it's really funny. So these are the decks that make me feel like a child at heart. They're the ones that I think shock my system so much that I kind of like shake my head and say, okay, wait, hold up. Let's not be serious. Let's actually have fun. Let's enjoy the play. Because some of this stuff is so outrageous that you can't do anything else but laugh at it. There we go. So these were my fifth house decks to represent play to me. All right, number 6 is going to be the daily habits, systems, and routines, a deck that you regularly use or a deck that you use for practical matters. So I actually picked a deck that I think represents both, and that is my White Sage Tarot. So this is my pocket deck, and when I finally surrendered and realized, hey, you're probably never going to use this formally at your tarot table. You're going to use this deck for like quick and dirty readings on the daily. This is one that gets a lot of daily use. That's when I realized, okay, you know what? I think this deck needs to stay in my collection because for the longest time I thought I was going to do these big Celtic crosses and these 12 card spreads with it. And I was like, no, actually, this is my perfect deck for the 6th house because I carry it around in my purse. It doesn't matter where I'm going, if I'm going to school or if I'm going to visit a friend at like a bar or if I'm going to a friend's house, I always have the White Sage on me. And so there is something so comforting about that routine. I have no intention of switching it up. I don't want like a different purse deck. I don't want anything else. Like I want White Sage because I am so used to it. Sorry guys, the lights just went off, so that's why it got dark all of a sudden, but I'll fix it in editing to brighten this up a little bit. I'm going to keep going. So I think too, also it is one that is so, because it is so stripped back, it is a deck that is incredibly practical. This is not a deck that wants to get into, for me at least, the big spiritual, philosophical questions. This is a deck that wants to meet you on the day-to-day. And because it is so small, I am able to quickly like pull like a 3-card reading without having to like struggle through like big honky chonky like sized cards. It also, of course, comes in a tin, which is my favorite way for a deck to be presented to us. And so what a practical reader, you know? I think too, because the 6th house is associated with Virgo typically, I really appreciate this deck as well for just like it's very like overt nod to animals, and I could bring this deck to yoga and really have a great time sitting within like that soothing energy of that calm security and like daily dedication. So White Sage is my 6th house deck. Now the next one is the 7th house, and this is for partnerships and contracts, a deck you feel deeply connected to or one you use for readings that work with other people. So I picked the spread deck, the Shadow Work edition for this. This is one of like the most used decks in my collection. Actually, so often it is used that I almost forget to talk about it. I don't know if you have that experience, but sometimes decks become so like part of your routine, similarly to like the White Sage. Like I know that one doesn't make it on my channel a lot. Like I have a lot of decks that I use, but it's like, it's not that I take them for granted, because I definitely don't with this deck. It's just that they've become so part of me that I sometimes forget to mention on here, like, hey guys, this is part of my routine. So with that being said, this deck has a glowing review for me. I love to use this deck when working with other people because as I'm like listening to them share with me some of the things that they're going through, I'm pulling out cards. And so I tend to jot down notes when someone books a reading with me about the issue they prefer to be read on. And then I go through and I pick keywords that I really feel like can help us dive deeper into the issue. And so to me, when I'm choosing to do those more logical, I want to make sure that my client walks away with all of their questions answered kind of spreads. I want something that is really representative of that seventh house kind of Libran energy. We are thinking through things. It's going to get done, but we also are involving other people. And so I do like using this, especially in working with clients, because you can lay the card like right here on the top, but the client can still see self-worth. And so I think it makes it more accessible to clients, because we as readers have a hard time remembering what spreads we've drawn cards for. Like I know that y'all have definitely drawn cards before and you're like, damn, what was that spread? Like I didn't write it down. Like what was that card position? And so to expect like the client to keep up with all of these different words on top of like listening to your messages, I feel like this gives them that cornerstone to where they're like, oh, okay, well, you told me that I need help in this area, and they can refer back to that card while listening to you interpret another. So it makes things more accessible for everyone. So this was the spread deck, the Shadow Edition. Okay, so now we're moving on to the 8th house, which is the house of transformation and secrets to be discovered, a deck you use for shadow work or magic. So for me, I wanted one that felt like magic, and so I got my Totem Tarot. Now I did edge this in black. Y'all look how sick this looks. I said I edged it, my best friend actually did. She's definitely an art girl and she did a great job. But this deck feels like magic to me. This is a deck that makes me want to tap into who the fuck is Kate? To reiterate on the earlier part of this message, this deck feels like that hard edge of Kate that I've been looking for. I do have a lot of black and white decks in my collection. I have a lot of pip decks in my collection, but a lot of those are very intunely kind of nature-based, which is fine. Like I love that. But this deck kind of takes its own direction by really feeling like it's working with materials. So 3 of metal actually is 3 of swords. And I love this so much because we have this triangle that's like moving outward here, but you can see like this is incredibly piercing. And so it's like, oh my goodness, it's pierced our heart, right? But at the same time, we're jetting forward, we're moving upon to new horizons. The majors are named after deities, which are explained in the guidebook. Moons are representative of the cup suit, which is so beautiful. So this is 8 of moons, 8 of cups. And to me, I love the fact that it is essentially new moons, right? Because we are walking away from that point in our life and moving towards something new. This is the time that we're setting new intentions after we've walked away from what has traditionally been very structured and stable in our lives. 4 of trees, this would be 4 of wands. And what a beautiful thing, because you have to have like a nice tight home base in order to celebrate and move forward. And then we have crystals here for pentacles. And isn't this just so beautiful how the crystals are just like moving around in this direction, like our wealth is spreading outward. So yeah, I don't know. I love this deck so much. It is a deck that makes me feel deeply magical, a deck that I want to use for exploring my own personal transformation, you know, into that self. But also this is a deck that feels like it has like secrets to be discovered. This is a very Halloween-y deck, I would say, but not in a kitschy Halloween, but like actually a deep reverence for the dark night to come kind of deck. So I love it. So even though it is simple, it is one that packs a punch, and it's definitely one to not be underestimated. All right, number 9 is our 9th house, and this is exploration and worldview. I had the hardest time with this one because I have a 9th house stellium, and my 9th house stellium is in Taurus, which I know is contradictory, but it means that I get to try a lot of really good food. That's how I typically explore new things, is through good food. And then I also, of course, collect decks, which help me explore new worldviews and books too. So with that being said, I felt like I had a lot of personal association with this house, and it took me a long time. But the prompt is a deck that expanded your perspective on tarot, or one you use for spiritual and philosophical questions. So I went with the one that expanded my perspective on tarot. And that has to be, I think this is the favorite deck that I got in 2024. I'm kind of upset that I didn't get it earlier, because now that it's spring, I don't want to work with the Architect's Tarot as much, because it's not, I don't know, my world is really busy. I'm kind of embracing that Aries energy, and this is really, really paired back. This feels very Aquarius to me. But this is totally the deck that explored, that like busted open and like expanded my understanding of tarot. So I've always read with a fool's journey in mind through the major arcana, but the coolest part about this deck is that all of the minors form a panorama. So I do have a walkthrough of this deck. I say walkthrough. It was a first impressions. First impressions that was really long because I had a lot to say about this deck. So if you're interested in that, I actually go through all of the suits and show how they link up. But for the purpose of this video, I'll go ahead and grab one to show you. Here we go. So here we have the Four of Swords and the Five of Swords, and you can see right here the shoreline connects. But it's so interesting, right? Because no longer are we the person that's resting, but perhaps we are actually building sanctuary for ourselves, because we can see upon ahead all of this tumultuous battling, like this senseless battling that's happening in the Five of Swords, even like this sense of defeat that's happening with these individuals, and we're protecting ourselves from that. And so, you know, it makes you really wonder, like, why is the Four of Swords depicted the way it is if we look in regards to the cards that are around it? So yeah, I think for that reason, this is my deck of exploration. This is the deck that taught me that something new about tarot. And I know that we can all relate to that. I'm really especially excited to watch the videos that other people have made to this hashtag, because I think when we've been reading tarot for so long, it's hard to find decks that really kind of like explode our worldview and teach us something new. So if you have a deck for this one, I would love to know, like, what is the deck that really kind of made you think about tarot in a different way? So I will check out other people's video responses, but just in case you're on here and you're a viewer of mine, I would love to hear, because I'm always looking to add decks like this into my collection. This is what I want. It's just unique, cool, different decks that push the boundaries in so many different ways. All right, guys, so we are trekking on to deck number 10. So house number 10, I do have a lot of planets in this house as well. So this is one I closely associate with. And this is the house of recognition and reputation, a deck that you trust to get it right, or one that defines your tarot style, a deck people associate with you. I think the deck I've selected fits all of this. Y'all can probably guess what it is. So, but I want to take it back to my career as I explain why. So I picked William Blake for this. Absolutely, I picked William Blake. I couldn't even think to pick anything else. So sorry, guys. I know it gets repetitive, but you know, we bond with our decks. That's part of this. So I always go to this deck with like the harder questions. This is one that I do trust to get it right, because it's the deck that looks at me and says, I'm not here to tell you an answer. I'm here for you to tell me an answer. So what do I mean by that? This deck is like very confrontational in the sense of it forces me to trust myself. If I don't tap in hard to my intuition, this is not a deck that I understand. It's a deck that goes over my head. And so I really have to let things flow. So this is a deck that has that reputation of getting it right for me. But in regards to like the traditional 10th house associations too, I'm a teacher by trade, and I'm an English teacher, and I teach 12th grade English. So not only are we hitting like the spot on the nose with the fact I'm teaching British literature, and this is William Blake, but also like the way that I want to describe my classroom to be, the way that I want my work to be is very dynamic. I went on a job interview one time and somebody was like, well, how would you describe your classroom, your ideal classroom setting in one word? And I told them dynamic. I want a deck and a classroom that shifts, a deck that is here to push boundaries. I want to do work in a way that I speak and I communicate with others. And I say that because my Mercury's in this house too. I want it to be loud, and I want it to be kind of assertive, and I want other kids to feel like they can be loud and assertive as well, and that we can communicate with some of these like deeper layers and deeper messages. But I guess more than anything, I want what I do at work to inspire kids to think outside of the box. It's incredibly important to me that I am teaching students how to think for themselves, how to critically think, but also to be divergent thinkers. And so I think this also represents my life mission is, you know, if I tell you to draw me a face, don't draw me a face of a human, draw me a face of a clock, draw me a face of a coin. That's what I'm interested in seeing, is how creative can you get with your answers. So I don't know, I hope that wasn't too much of a tangent, but recognition and reputation, y'all definitely recognize this deck and probably associate it with me. It's a deck that I hold in high reputation, and it's a deck that also represents the vibrancy and then also the divergency of thinking that I hope my classroom can foster. Yeah. Okay, I think I'm good. I hope that made sense. So now we are moving on to house number 11, the 11th house, which would be community and collaboration, a deck you use for readings about activism, collective energy, or the wider network. So for this one, I actually chose an oracle, and I chose my Lucille Clifton oracle. I'm going to try to go through these really slow so that y'all are able to read if necessary. For a while, I was using this deck for daily morning check-ins. Hello, come here each morning for a word. I used to love when I pulled this card in the morning. And I found that this deck had an uncanny ability to really give me the vibe of what I was about to walk into for work. So for example, I had a young kid. I decided to get my kids to do this, I believe, speeches. And I'm talking about this with the 11th house because, you know, the 11th house is all about traditional, like, Aquarian norms, which would be like social revolution and social norms and group settings and things like that. And so I got my kids to write a this, I believe, speech where essentially they picked a topic and they got in front of the classroom and they just had to have written an artistic piece that described them as individuals. And one day while we were going through the speeches, I had this boy who had turned 18, and so it was his birthday, and he gave a speech that absolutely made him just cry, and the whole classroom was crying. And the morning that he gave that speech, I pulled a card from this deck, and it was this card. What entered the light was one man, and what walked out was another. And I had pulled that the morning before, and that student came to me that afternoon and told me that he felt like his whole life was changed based off of the response that his peers gave to him being extremely vulnerable, right? So this is a deck that can read the room. I love to use this deck before work because my form of activism is through teaching these students. My form of activism is teaching them and encouraging them to critically think. And so I constantly have to check in with my network and say, okay, what is today's vibe going to be like in my classroom? It's going to be a small gathering gathered in sorrow or joy. I can work a lot with that. And I find that to be a really beautiful thing, to have a deck that reminds us to love the silences, but also love the terrible noise. How perfect is that for classroom, right? Because sometimes when it's a little silent, the teacher is like, oh my goodness, I'm so bored. Like, I'm ready for people to talk. And I am an extrovert, but don't get me wrong, I do leave plenty of room for my introverts too. But then also at the same time, the kids get too rowdy, and it's a reminder to love that terrible noise. So I think that this is the deck that I use because it is a deck that constantly keeps me in tune with my own activism. I have to be able to read the vibe of the room in order to inspire kids to critically think. But it is also one that helps me to reach a wider network. And through these very metaphoric ideas, get a sense of what certain students are feeling or certain classes are feeling. Where we know where we are, what we are. I've gotten this one a couple times. So, all right. I think we're on to the last one. This is the 12th house, the house of secrets and hidden depths. So this is a deck that helps you to understand themes and bring to surface hidden knowledge. I have two decks for this one. The first deck I have is Story Through Stone, which if y'all ever notice, I don't know if y'all notice, because most of the time I pause my videos between switching between decks, but I keep my decks in bags. So anything that stays in a box, it means that is perpetually on my altar and it never, ever, ever, ever leaves. But this is the deck that I use to uncover that hidden depths. So this is based off of a set of artwork, not artwork, sorry. Let me take that back. This is photographs of Sandera Quackenbush, who is the creator. Her father had collected stones throughout his career as a park ranger, and she photographed these stones to share with other people, to share their wisdom. And so I definitely love the concept of a lot of these stones were buried in the earth, right? Her father found these stones that have these stories on it, but these stones are still part of that earth. And when I think of like hidden knowledge and hidden layers, I know that the 12th house is typically associated with Pisces, so it's associated with water, but I can't think of anything for me personally more metaphoric than the concept of rocks to represent layers. I can just imagine going to these like towering cliffs and being able to see all of the different layers of time just by the different types of sediment that are included into those rock layers. And so this is one that I like to help get me in tune with my most intuitive self. This is a deck that I like to use because it has no guide words. It has no keywords. You jump in and you trust your intuition and you make the best out of that reading. And I think we need decks that push us to take off those training wheels. You've got this, girl. Like, you can do it, you know? And you don't need to rely on these extensive guidebook entries all the time. And that's not to pass judgment on people that get a lot of value on that. I think that that is incredibly important to work in a way that fits your reading style. But speaking personally to me, I needed that moment where I woke up and said, you know what, I can still read the guidebook. There's still so much information to learn from other people's interpretations, but what is my interpretation? What do I think about this? And this is a deck that helps that. But because this is the house of collective, like, unconsciousness as well, I think this deck also reminds me that I am part of larger things. One day my body will rot and I will turn to ash, and that ash will be part of that sediment layer where old bones and old matter have built up. A rock is part of the sediment that has passed before it. So there's that layer in it too. You know, what do I believe? How can I trust my own intuition? But also, how can I surrender to being part of this larger rock? All right. So that was Story Through Stones. And like I said, I think I did pick another one. But you know what? We're going to keep that at that. When I talked my way through this deck, I was like, you know what? I think this is the deck I would use for it. I don't know if I would use the other one I picked. So I'm going to go ahead and call it quits. So I hope that all of you are having a wonderful spring. It is so wonderful to be here with all of the different flowers that are coming up in my garden. I've been taking a lot of time to myself to sit out in the garden. So if I've been a little bit more pared back or a little bit quieter than usual, just know that I've been outside with my feet in the grass. So it is so good to see y'all, and I hope that all of you have a lovely day. Thank y'all so much for being here.